Hello everyone, I'm Ian Gibbons, the Director for the Institute for Food, Nutrition and Health, and it's my great pleasure in being able to talk to you today. Can I just thank the organisers for the opportunity that they've given me to do this. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about the Institute, what it does, and what its aspirations are, if you like. Maybe just to start to say that, we are quite interested in nutrition and health issues across the whole of the human lifespan. Children, adolescents, middle-aged, elderly, all have their own kind of issues in relation to nutrition. With generally speaking, we're having an aging populations, the whole issue of trying to reduce the risk in old age has become quite a big topic. Just introduce to the two deputy directors of the Institute. On the left, Vimal Karani, Professor of Nutrigenetics, Nutrigenomics. I'll say a little bit more about that in a while. And Dr. Miriam Clegg, who's an Associate Professor in Human Nutrition. Miriam's particular focus is on what you might call public health nutrition. In other words, partly the translation of nutritional research findings into dietary guidelines, if you like. I thought I'd just say where we were, in case anybody wasn't sure. You see here, obviously, a picture of Western Europe, and you can see the UK sitting on the edge, with the capital city in London, of course, down here. If we just expand that area a bit, you can see that Reading is to the west of London, only about 23 minutes from central London to Reading, on the trains that are now running every 10 or 15 minutes. So it's very easy to get back to and from London from Reading. On the Reading campus, the core staff of the Institute are in this building you can see here, a nice, fairly new building. But of course, we actually work across many parts of the campus, some of which I've just listed down here. Food Nutritional Sciences is probably the most important department. Also psychology, clinical language services, agriculture, and SIN. SIN is the Centre for Integrative Neurosciences and Neurodynamics. Basically, SIN is interested in the brain, and they've got functional MRI scanning, so they can actually image the brain and see what's actually happening in there. It's really interesting stuff. So the role of the Institute, broadly speaking, the role is what it says there, connecting research across the campus, across the University of Reading. We have quite a lot of different departments and different units, as you saw some of them on the map a minute ago. And it's really bringing them all together to work together in a way which will enhance the quality of the research. And indeed, for some of the big research issues in our area, you need a multidisciplinary approach to look at them. University's research is organised into themes. The one that we are kindly most aligned with is the agriculture, food and health theme, which, as you can see, runs a fairly long way across the food chain. But more recently, also with the environment food chain, it's becoming much more important, as I'm sure you know, to understand the environmental impact of producing foods, particularly certain foods, and indeed the environmental impact of diets as a whole. So we work also with the environment research theme. One of the key roles that we've got, and indeed this was one of the roles that we took on when the Institute was started towards the end of 2017, I think it was. We are really the university's interface with EIT Food. EIT Food, some of you may know about it. It's basically an organisation funded, at least partially funded, by the European Union. And it's really part of the effort of the EU to try and enhance food that's produced, food processing, people's understanding about food, and also to improve the trust between particularly food retailers, actually, food manufacturers, and the population as a whole. And so it does lots of things. You can see it has work in innovation, which is really research in our minds, education, and that's not just the public at large. Some of it is, but some of it's to other universities. We've just finished producing a short course on nutrition for medical students, actually. Entrepreneurship. EIT was really keen to get startup companies involved, particularly startup companies that have a connection with food in some way or other, and also public engagement to make sure that the work that it does is understood by the public, and as I said a minute ago, really improves the trust that there is amongst the different parts of the food industry and the public. You can see on the right here, this is a map showing the locations of the partners of EIT Food. And all of the partners you can see in here, including us, have to pay a membership fee every year to remain part of it. And that allows us to make submissions to EIT Food for funding from them in order to carry out work that they've identified as being important to them. It's slightly complicated, but that's broadly what it is. So you can see there's quite a spread of partnerships far north into Scandinavia, particularly northern Finland, also in Iceland, actually. Quite a large cluster in Belgium and in the Netherlands and in the UK, Ireland, and spread out through the rest of Europe largely. The ones down here, I think one of them is Malta, and I think there may actually be now a member in Israel, which I'm not sure if that's on the map or not, but there is a member in Israel now. So it's fairly the boundary of Europe, if you like, is a little bit flexible in this project. So what are the key targets that we have that we either have work in or have aspirations to do work in? Well, all of those things you can see there. I suppose in the last 20 years, the main target really has been reducing cardiovascular disease risk through diet. We've done a lot of work there on different types of dietary fats, association between different types of fat, and so forth. Now that's really been expanded to include type 2 diabetes, because some of the underlying factors which will give rise to type 2 diabetes, predominantly, obesity, are also components of the risk to cardiovascular disease. And indeed, people that end up not having well-controlled diabetes will almost certainly develop some form of cardiovascular disease. So a lot of the mortality associated with type 2 diabetes is actually recorded as being cardiovascular disease. We have quite an interest across the university on gut health, and particularly the gut microbiota, and the very active role that it actually plays in our health, much more active than we thought maybe 5 years ago. And now there is a communications channel between the microbes in the gut and the brain, and it works in both directions. It's quite interesting. I'll say a little more about that in a minute or two. Brain health, I'm not going to say much more about. That's really the sin that I talked about before. We are interested in bone health. It's becoming much more important with an aging population, because obviously age is a risk factor for bone breakage. Epidemiology, we've done quite a bit in this area in the last 10 or 15 years, working sometimes at other universities. But this is really about looking at the long-term studies, so-called prospective studies, where populations are monitored over long periods of time, the diet is assessed regularly, and there's also a good record and a good classification of diseases that they develop. And then at the end of the follow-up period, sometimes quite long, you can then mathematically look at the association between dietary inputs, or dietary consumption, and disease outcome. And that's been particularly useful for things like cardiovascular disease and to some extent diabetes, which have a very, they develop over a very long period of time. And also, which I mentioned before, nutrigenetics, nutrigenomics, which has been Vimal Karani's focus and expertise. Again, becoming more important, partly because of the desire in certain circumstances for personalized nutrition, but actually we also need to know the influence of certain of our genes, what influence they have on our risks, and whether there's an association between, or whether there's an interaction between particular genes and diet, and indeed there is. And also, of course, going backwards, food processing, big issue really, because nearly all food that we consume is processed to some degree. And that can affect not only the nutritional characteristics of it, but it can affect flavor and consumer desire for it and so forth. And associated with those targets, these are the key units. The key one really for much of what we do is food nutritional sciences, particularly the Hugh Sinclair unit of human nutrition led by Professor Julie Lovegrove. Some of you may know or heard of her. But also food processing. We have quite a large food processing center. It's generally called a pilot plant, but it's actually quite a lot bigger than most pilot plants. And they've just had an upgrade to all of the dairy processing equipment. So that's pretty new. The gut laboratory, which is again focused very much on the gut microbes in the intestines, led by Professor Glenn Gibson, who was one of the key developers actually of the concept of prebiotics, which you may have heard of that, and also quite a big input into sensory science. What is it that changes people's perceptions of flavor, and can we develop foods which are more flavorsome to the elderly, which tend to lose quite a lot of their sensory characteristics as they get quite old, things like that. So a big area of that. And on the edges, to some extent, we have the School of Agriculture, Policy and Development, concerned predominantly with primary production of food, particularly dairy foods and plant foods. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the School of Psychology particularly is now becoming interested in the effect of diet on people's psychological response, if you like, in terms of things like cognition. And also, of course, they're very interested in the development of dementias, which is becoming quite an issue. We also have quite a bit of activity, which are what I've called non-European international. We have an agreement with the institute called ICRISAT, headquarters in Hyderabad in central India. It's really a plant breeding institute, quite an old, long-standing institute. And they're now developing breeding new crops, which are going to produce food, basically. And so we've come in along with them to provide our nutrition and health knowledge, along with their ability to produce new food crops. This is the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation in Chennai. And in fact, Vimal Karani, who I mentioned before, he did his PhD there some years ago. So we have quite a bit of interaction with that. Also with the Aga Khan University Hospital in Nairobi. I'm particularly involved with the pediatric world there, which is, they have lots and lots of problems in young children, malnutrition and a range of issues. And also the University of Nairobi, which is connected. Also the University of Florida that I work with a bit, they've got a very big US aid grant to improve the diets of children, predominantly in Africa and in the Far East. And Vimal actually is working also with the university in Peru. Again, feeding in his expertise in the areas I've mentioned. And indeed, he's now got a collaborative project with Utah, which is a university in Malaysia. And again, that's actually for the development of trying to teach the skills needed for developing nutrigenetics, nutrigenomic sciences, really to benefit the health of the population of Malaysia and maybe beyond that. Finally, just quickly to say that in terms of the work we do with ICRISAT, predominantly looking at things that we can help with stunting in children and also with anemia in women, not just pregnant women. Both of those issues have a very large prevalence in India and indeed many parts of Africa. And so we're trying to develop big projects to try and look at those. So I think my time is just about up. Just leave you with 4 pictures of 4 of our campuses. We're actually another campus in Reading, which is known here. Henley-on-Thames, this is the main campus in Reading, newish campus in Malaysia, and a smaller campus just outside Johannesburg in South Africa, which is actually part of the Henley Business School, which the university now owns, if you like. So I'll leave you with thank you very much for attention. And as you know, I'm not actually with you today, even online. But please do pass any questions you've got to the organisers, who will send them to me, and I'll answer them back directly.